So in case you haven't heard, Lost Skies has officially released their 27th update of the development cycle, and alongside this have some extremely exciting new additions coming that will fill up the skies with some terrifying brand new enemy types, as well as upcoming bosses and content for the coming regions of the game, to even the long-awaited and monstrous weather walls that many of you likely remember from the days of Worlds Adrift. So today we'll be covering all the latest additions coming to Lost Skies, along with the new major creatures and even possible hints as to what we could expect for the future of the game. Starting out, the devs mentioned that there has been a ton of feedback regarding wanted UI improvements, where consequently Vlad has been working on improving the technical foundations of the game, refining the UI in particular. He's been improving how the game understands what the player is looking at and implementing better gamepad support, alongside making it much more intuitive for the player to navigate inventory with gamepad, where in the video we get a demonstration of the visual adjustments to UI for item selection being translated into another chest box, which can now be even renamed, where it seems the devs are really trying to focus on making the game's design structure focused on PC and console functionality simultaneously, making adjustments for autofill functions in the crafting component requirements, alongside changes in the realm of game buffs and their applied effects. Mentioning that one of the team's developers, Ollie, has been undertaking the massive task of reviewing all 80 in-game food items and their effects, giving each of them their own specific buffs and respective debuffs, likely for the raw meat counterparts of certain foods, where in addition he's also been diving into the game difficulty, using player feedback and in-game data to create a secret calculator tool, where the devs mention that this formula will be used to help them balance NPC stats and damage to fine-tune the time to kill for any given enemy across the board and the overall challenge of the game as well. In addition, there's also been a ton of feedback lately regarding the performance optimization, where Andy, likely the same Andy Green from the previous updates we covered on Wind Walls and Winds of the World and the game experience optimization, he is focusing on tackling game memory strain, which is created when the environment loads, likely referring to the large challenge of loading in massive islands at a distance when you're approaching with your skyship. His work aims to make the experience of discovering and exploring islands much smoother for everyone, while Luke and Tony have been collaborating on some significant improvements to core gameplay systems, giving players more diverse ways to play the game. In addition, the devs addressed another major issue to the game, that being the lighter ship issue. As of late, the particular concept was very heavily addressed by a creator called World of Wolf, who makes some extremely informal content on everything regarding Lost Skies, from the glitches to the duplication techniques to the nature of maximizing ship engine utilization, and has been covered before. The movement speeds that your ship can acquire in the game's current state seems to almost exponentially benefit you, the smaller that the ship is. Now, while Adam has since crossed out this line, which states that to help mitigate the issue of lighter ships always having an advantage, stats on ships' components are now randomized, where after a secondary review, he mentions that the corrected change they are actually making is that until now, it didn't matter what the propellers you used on your engines or even what barrels you used on your cannons in respect to stats. That alone was purely a cosmetic change until now. However, going forward with these subcomponents, they will now come with randomized stat rolls, allowing you to find the perfect combination to enhance and modify your ship parts. Also mentioning that these subcomponents can even roll with unique stats that cannot be found on certain ship parts that you may research. Now, to help break down the technicality of this change, in case you haven't played a lot of Lost Skies before, while the images they provide for this don't exactly do it a lot of justice, it seems that to be in regards to the many different schematics you will find on the islands on your journey through the skies. Oftentimes you will come across many duplicates of schematics, which almost become completely useless to learn by that point. As opposed to simply throwing out your extra duplicate schematics, it's actually now in your benefit to save them all, as each individual component will have a randomized stat pool as you learn them, meaning that at different points you may have learned, for example, 3 different kinds of propellers that have stats or buffs catered toward certain strengths and weaknesses on your ship. If you want your ship's design to focus more on being lightweight and speedy, you might opt for a propeller type with a higher acceleration or power. And if you care more about putting less strain on your ship core, having a high energy efficiency instead, where having slightly worse but more engines on your ship might actually give you more boost in speed, as opposed to just individual habitually having very high speed, high acceleration engines, but because of their high energy consumption, doesn't allow you to have as many on your ship. So it allows for many different aspects of consideration when actually building the best ship for how you want to actually fly through the skies, which thus creates an incentive for collecting as many schematics as possible, even for the same thing, which it seems you will also be able to unlearn those schematics that you collect if they are useless ones that you find out you don't really need. In addition, Luke and Tony have been working on a comfort system, as well as implementation where the more effort you put into decorating your ship, the more rested you will become. Furnishings like plants and other nice items will grant a buff while you're on board, where consequently they created an internal and incremental comfort point system, which is also affected in relation to the open zones on board, which they show with a picture, for example, in the red section containing a crafting bench, where you lose a point, for example, in the red section containing a crafting bench, as it doesn't provide you comfort, which they show with a picture, for example, in the red section containing a crafting bench, you lose a point of your rested level in a given open space or square on your ship. However, a bed might give you 2 points of comfort, and a plant might give you 1 more point in a specific square section that you actually stand in. And if you move to another that is adjacent or offset from the location of those items, it seems they will collectively calculate their net comfort ratings to adjust how the player experiences that respective buff and or comfort. And of course, the buff of being well rested, which adjusts depending, will change how your health regenerates and your stamina regenerates as well for a given time frame. These individual buffs also come with their own exceptions as well. In the labeling, for example, of the comfort system where you can be sheltered/sitting, this means that you can receive the comfort point by simply sitting in a chair above deck on your ship, even if it's not covered and you're not sheltered. So consequently, this just means that each comfort prerequisite is not only dependent on what's close by on your ship and the things that you've added to it, but is also determined by what the player is doing as well, either sitting in a chair or laying in your bed. You get the gist. Another small improvement change is going to be the ship core adjustment, adding functionality for the player after he's added the ship core attachments to improve the ship's weight capacity and its max energy utilization to move the entire core component system as one singular entity, which allows for a much simpler real-time customization, saving the player the annoying process of deconstructing the core components just to move it once, and then just put them all back on again. Now, getting to the meat of the newest and coolest stuff, Ollie has been designing a menagerie of new creatures to populate the skies in the second region, the scariest of which I think is the cave bug Hulk. This thing respectively functions similar to a cave bug but on crack. When the creature burrows underground to attack you and blasts its way above, creating a massive impact area, it will hit you with enough force to launch you 2 stories into the sky, alongside its ravenous poison cloud effects that will be the focus of the Region 2 creatures theme, which carries into the next set of creatures the devs are adding, the Adderbane and Harpy. These creatures hunt in groups of adults and juveniles. Harpies themselves as flying creatures are inherently blind, but have incredibly sensitive hearing, where they'll try and circle you overhead and dive at any sound that you make alongside shooting a powerful wind gust at you to attack. Now, it's unclear if in the update the Adderbane refers to the new deer type, however, this is nonetheless a brand new addition, one that expressively looks almost completely alien-like, seeming to fire shots of poisonous projectiles at the player alongside charging at you to create a cloud of poison following behind it, which makes for a new type of enemy to face off against, which does limit your movements in certain directions as different areas are cut off by that cloud of poison. In addition to the newest creatures, we also have more designs from the art team. Much like the familiar styles of Worlds Adrift, Lara has been hard at work developing a range of beautiful new masks that seem to be reminiscent of the more desert/sand dune attire and aesthetic. In addition, it seems the devs have also made some new ship components and designs much akin to the newer style of the second region, with a handful of overhead deck sail covers and ship panels with some stunning blue exteriors and familiar goldish and rusted steel designs, along with a beautiful bed design and even foliage boxes with some pedestals, which seem to be combining with the supporting ship struts and even a familiar faceplate for added style with what looks almost like a captain's chair, with some stunning Region 2 designs. Second to this, Claudia has also been working on some incredible new boss tier enemies, namely creatures known as Arbiters. Creatures many of you may recognize as one of the starting bosses that makes an appearance at the beginning of the game, worlds as well, which some of you likely are familiar with to be much larger and powerful enemies, and of course the Harbinger, which we have seen very little of thus far, except through the trailers of Lost Skies, only showing glimpses of what they can do. In these pictures the devs have provided us, we get to see a large swath of these creatures broken into respective components to demonstrate not only how the creatures will fall apart as you battle them with your ship's weapons, but also to demonstrate how modular the structuring of the bosses has come together. However, there are a couple things I really want to bring your attention to here, as well as give you a better perspective of what likely is to come. In the second image showing off the different bosses, we also get a picture of the very massive multi-story ship that some of you may recognize from the game's trailers, which, as you can likely tell from the image, makes the thing look almost tiny compared to the Harbingers, which we have yet to actually been able to experience in a fight as of now, which truly puts into perspective the scale of these beings we will have to face off in the skies, which, in case some of you may remember from one of my previous videos covering the future of Lost Skies in early access, it was iterated on by Oliver. One of the components they might be working toward is creating a series of possible mini-bosses within specific regions, which contain pieces of weapons with certain attack patterns and abilities that the respective region Harbinger or boss would holistically and collectively have. But going back to these images, we can visually recognize the age on these beings. Not only is their machinery rusted, but even the type of foliage on each boss seem to imply an origin of where each one came from. Now, as we can see with the green bosses, it will likely be indicative of the Region 1 foliage. However, on the right we see the familiar orange/autumn style foliage from Region 2. In addition to the blue/aqua style glowing foliage, we could likely guess to be a part of the third region of the game. However, while you might be inclined to assume this is 100% the style of foliage for the third region, I can't safely confirm this. As if you've ever played parts of Lost Skies before, you may know that even within the Region 1 there are subcategories of 3 different foliage types that work for each individual area, at least as far as we've seen, which does leave a question as to what formation these different Arbingers and Heralds will make up. And while to this point I would go into the region structure initially shown on the Skywatch, as of a recent update to the post which I took down, I was specifically asked by Control, the community director, long may he reign, to not show any of that information, as the team redacted sharing certain parts of that world structure, as they believed it was either spoiling too much too soon or that it wasn't yet ready to be confirmed. However, if you all are curious, I would recommend you try using the Lost Skies Discord to investigate, as I'm sure the information as it was made public can be found there by some individuals with enough time. Although this information can always change as the game is being developed, it does also imply from a game lore perspective that these beings seem to stay within, or at least suggest the possibility that these beings didn't just originate from one place, but were in fact created in each respective area of the world, leaving me to suspect that in fact not only was the arrival of the Seraph a sudden intervention from a lore perspective, but that it was coordinated unilaterally across the world of Lost Skies as we know it, which does raise a larger number of questions in my mind as to where the Seraph actually originated from and whether the large island in the sky had something to do with it, which I'll be leaving to those of you in the comments to figure out for the future. The last and one of the most interesting additions we get to see is the new storm wall. As I'm sure many of you remember from the days of Worlds Adrift, the devs mention as they build out Region 2, Andy has been working on the awe-inspiring weather wall that separates the different regions of the game. Now, it's unclear if in this statement how they may or may not expand the weather walls themselves to different regions further on. However, back in Worlds Adrift, going to and from certain regions of the game back in the day, initially we had wind walls, which are, as they say, walls of wind that would violently shake your ship around, and in addition we also had things like storm walls, which shook your ship even more violently while lightning struck and obstructed the vision in a heavy storm. Now, as to the implementation of further wall types, we don't yet know if there will be more difficult walls coming, much like the sand walls we once had in the previous game. However, the devs are in the current state of working to compile together the different region types and how they will all work in conjunction. I would guess that now they plan to focus more on fleshing out the regions and simply building out a proper world structure and segmentation rather than creating all sorts of random wall types in the forefront, as I would imagine from a game development standpoint, making wall changes once they have fleshed out the storm wall player to ship interaction animations and effects that simply adjusting the style and modification to how it's designed won't be an extremely difficult challenge, which simply comes down to how Luke sees the vision for the game. But nonetheless, it is extremely cool to see them finally being able to show off and even witness the crackling lightning and storms within the actual storm wall itself at a distance, even standing far off on an island. Regardless, I hope you found this video somewhat informational, and like always, have a beautiful rest of your day, boys. Peace.